Good morning, my name is Michael Blakley. I'm with District 2 Roadway Design, and today we are going to do a webinar on Guideline 6.0. We're going to go over some of the basic instructions on how to create signs, specialty signs, using the Guideline program, and along the way we'll do some little tips and tricks that will help you as a user to be able to do some of these non-standard signs and stuff that is special to your specific project. And to get started, we'll simply click on the version of MicroStation software that you're using, or you may be using it as a standalone. And go to your project directory. For today's example, we're going to have a guide sign project set up. And you may have it under signals, or you may have it under signing, depending on the particular job, and you could possibly have guide sign panels in each discipline, depending on your project. Once you create the project, usually you will not have a guide sign file set up. And the reason for this demonstration is very important, is the guide sign file is unique, unlike a lot of your other design files where it needs a special seed file. Okay, now that MicroStation is up, one of the important options we have is you usually start off with some kind of file to open up your project, whether it's referenced in roadway files or topographic files or whatever. And underneath your discipline bar or wherever your directories are set, the most important thing I can tell you is go through the Create Edit option. If you're not familiar with that option, there's webinars on that as well, and Jimmy Pro will be updating some of this stuff. But just to kind of show you, you want to make sure your project path is set. But the main thing is underneath either signals or signing and pavement marking, that you come and choose the guide sign worksheet in details and tell it to create that file and access that file. Once that file is created, you will then want to go in to your guide sign file. Here I have some tests already set up just to make sure it was working. But when you get into that file, it should have nothing in it. It's unique to itself. It's different than any of your other programs. Another thing is the way you access the Transoft guide sign program. Some may do it through the utility MDL applications, or you may have other quick links. In our district, our CAD manager has set us up with a CAD app to access our guide sign program. Whichever way you choose or have to open up the guide sign program, this is your basic toolbar that you will see that comes up. One of the first things I like to do, especially if I'm on a new PC and I'm on a different PC, so this is going to come up as the default. You will open up your program setting with the little wrench symbol, and you will have your general setup. Do we want it in English or metric measurements? And what version of the MUTCD are we going to use? The latest version we have to choose from is the 2009 edition. The next is your display options. Do we want it in color? Do we want it in black and white? Or just an outline? For the upfront design part, the color option is okay. And we'll come back to this at some point as a hint and a tip. Under locks, these could be all on or all off depending on how your program was set. I choose my option. I do not use the auto update panel. The ports, the dimensions, and the zoom are okay. When we get to the auto update situation, I will explain why I choose to turn that option off. The dimensions, this is pretty much preset. You can change your scale options a little bit, but the guide sign program does that for you. The dictionaries, we don't have anything listed. This is a default. The little hints are tips and tricks that guide sign tells you to come in. If you're new to this process, you may choose to leave all these options on. And as we go through the steps, you will see these come up. And of course, the licensing and contact information is all general. Once you've set this first part up, the next important step is to decide what type of sign that we need to create. Is it an information guide sign, a distance guide sign, and so on, depending on your project. And you could have multiple different signs. So the next step in that process is to pick a panel style. And guide sign, the Transoft people have done a great job and have added several different types of signs that are already set up for us. One of the most common signs is a guide sign with a destination to it. In this case, in our project, we're going to take the assumption that we have a sign that tells us that we're going to Tallahassee and which direction Tallahassee is. So the next step is what type of roadway. They've added a underbar CON for conventional roads. If you have an expressway or interstate, you can come down and click on one of the underbar express. For our particular first example, we'll use the guide sign on a conventional roadway, and we're going to choose that and say OK. You'll notice nothing comes up, and guide sign's a little different than maybe a lot of other CAD programs where it doesn't show what the next step is. The next step in this series is to create this sign panel. Well, we have a template already set, so we don't need to go in and actually create another template as the next step shows. We want to simply place a new panel. When we choose that, our next dialog comes up with some additional information to fill in. The name of the sign, the quantity of the sign, the station of the sign, and our mounting types. We have two options here. We can fill in a name of the sign now, we can fill in a quantity, and we can fill in the station. This may be options that you particularly have at the time you're creating the sign, or it may not. We can simply choose to call this sign 100. And we can leave it at a quantity of 1, or you could name this by the particular sign. This name is the name that you are going to add to your plans to show the contractor from the guide sign worksheet into your design file what a particular sign identification number is. It could be letters, numbers, names. That's your personal preference as to what you choose. The stationing. We may know the station. It may be at 150 plus 00.00. Our mounting height, we have the choice of overhead or ground. This is a kind of a tip and a hint that I want to give out now. The default of this on most machines I've been on seems to be on overhead. This will show up on your report. This is something you want to check. Now, another hint to this is if you don't have this information as of right now, you do not have to fill this in. You can come back and update the panel at a later date or another time. Once you have this information set, or again, if you do not have this information at this time, but you need to go ahead and create the sign panel, we can come back to this. The width and the height of this sign right now, we may know or we may not know. At this point, we can choose to leave this option as set, and we simply say OK. Once we have that, we click and drop the panel into our working design file. Once we have our sign in here, the next step is to place text. We place our text by clicking on the letter A for placing the highway text. Again, nothing shows up on your cursor. From this point on, everything that relates in GuideSign to this panel will be accessed by clicking on the toolbar and clicking somewhere inside our sign panel. Once we do this, we have the option to come in and place our signs. We have different preset styles set up. The title name is a default. We can come in and type in our lettering here. We also have an option from the GuideSign program of creating and accessing preset panels for conventional roads and different types of roadways. If we were creating a GuideSign series for a conventional road, we have the choices of different types of signs. We have our destination signs. We have some preset, some of these. You may choose one of these options as well. If we choose option 1, this would be our sign. We can come in and we can change where we only have the name and one arrow. This option we can take away where we would just have the name. This is up to the user's preference for the particular sign they're using. If you choose to use one of these preset signs, you'll notice that it comes in with all this information preset. Because we just filled out, this is a kind of a generic format. As you notice with this format, we have the name, we can add whatever our sign title would need to be, and a directional arrow. This is pretty much for basic signs. I want to throw this option out there. One of the issues with this is the text height and width may not accommodate your particular sign. The spacing of the sign is not exactly per some of our standards. But the option is there for a quick sign to be able to use that. The method that I would recommend to use is to simply go in and create these signs and lettering manually. You still have the options here of a name and units. These are one of the hints that come up. You can choose now to say do not display this. Once you've read the hint, that's the user's choice. Once you determine what type of sign, what type of lettering we have the default that comes through the GuideSign program. Here, this tells me if I type a name in here, that I'm going to create a sign with a 6-inch letter, and my font is going to be a D series. At this point, if you're not familiar with signs, you would find this information through your MUTCD, and certain signs, if you're doing it for the Florida Department of Transportation, are dictated through our traffic engineer manual for size of lettering to start with. We always want to start with a larger lettering type for better visibility. In this case, the 6-inch is the minimum height. Here, we simply choose the Advanced button, and we come up with this dialog box. Here under our component would simply be our name. You would type in the name. Here we have the option of changing our font. For a conventional roadway, we want to choose an 8-inch lettering. The fonts start with the F and work our way down. As you go from the lettering alphabetically down, the smaller the thickness of your lettering becomes. This is all explained in the Standard Highway Signs Manual if you need to choose your fonts. E-modified is one of our larger fonts that we typically use. Once we choose that, we can simply say OK, and we can place our legend inside our sign panel. And you will see I have multiple options to be able to place this. Placing a single sign, we simply just place it in the middle. Once again, we chose in the original setup to have our auto update for our dimensions on. Now, we've created this sign. When we created this sign, we had the options of our letter size. We had the options of what size sign to make. Because we're not sure a lot of times on what our lettering may be, I like to choose to place the sign and let the Guide Sign program give me a basic setup. Okay? One tip here is, as you see, I typed in the word Tallahassee in all capital letters. We have it 8-inch E-mod. At this point, you can look at your sign and you can determine whether your text is misspelled. If we had a misspelling, or we do not like the letter size or the type of font, we can edit that with the AB button, go back to our advanced mode, and we can simply retype the word Tallahassee. We could change our letter height if we needed to, or we could change our font. It automatically updates. Now, it may shift your text slightly one way or the other. At this point, we're okay. We've created our Tallahassee. The next step in a destination sign is to point the direction of our path. We have the option of multiple arrows to choose from. Once again, we click to choose an arrow. We click in our Guide Sign panel. We have the option of multiple arrow sizes to choose from. Over on the side, you can go to multiple arrow types. Angles, you will simply choose the best fit for your project. In this particular case, we will say that Tallahassee is straight ahead, and we're going to choose the arrow type D. Tell it OK. At this point, our arrow comes in with a default width of 6 and a length of 9. Our rotation angle is 0. If we choose to have a different angle, we can do this in 90-degree increments. If this setup is exactly as we need, we can say OK. We've placed our lettering. Guide Sign automatically uses the letter height of your legend to create and center the panel. The spacing from the E to the edge of the sign is created. Once we have this set up, we see now that we have a 10-foot sign 6 foot tall. Our height is 6 foot. Our width is 10 foot. We only have 8-inch lettering. At this point, we can go back to our update existing panel, choose that option, choose our sign panel. This is where we can go back in now. We can again change or add a name, a quantity, our stationing, our mounting, our reflectivity, and our height and width. All sign panels for the purpose of creation in our projects should be in 6-inch increments. As you see on our sides, we have an uneven distance over here. We have 16.7 and we have 14.8. If we chose to leave this and add this to our guide sign worksheet, this is what the contractor would see. So we want to come in and we want to center this legend inside of our sign panel and shrink our signs down into a 6-inch increment. At this time, we can come in and we can decrease this 10 foot, our 120, down to a legend of 8 inches or close to that. As the MUTCD shows, we should have a legend border width from the sign to our border greater than or equal to that of our largest letter height. Here we would simply come in and click the lock button for our width and decrease our width down, say, a foot to a half a foot in increments until we work this out. The first thing we can choose to do is see what guide sign is going to do for us by saying OK. It automatically shrunk our sign down to a 9 foot by 2 foot sign. Our side panel is 9.7 inches on each side. Everything is nice and centered. Over here, our arrow height is 9 inches. We have a 7.5 and a 7.5 height here. On the other side, our Tallahassee, we have 7.5 to the top, but we have 8.5 to the bottom. This tells us that Tallahassee is not centered inside of our arrow. If you choose this option to leave it, you can simply leave the sign as is. If you choose to move the word Tallahassee to center it, as shown in the MUTCD, you would click the Move command. This hint tells you about moving multiple objects. Here we just simply want to move Tallahassee. We click the word Tallahassee. Now we have the options to move object. We have snap commands. When the term to object is to an object inside the sign panel. If you notice, as I scroll my cursor down, you see the box move down. As I click, you notice it shifted everything down. At this point, now that I've moved my legend, I come back to the Update Existing panel, click once again in the sign program. Again, we still have the options to make these changes. If we choose not to make the changes, we simply say OK, and it's going to update our dimensioning. And you see that we moved the word Tallahassee down. But this time, our 8.5 is on the top, our 7.5 is on the bottom. This is where a tip will come in to the guide sign, to where we want to move the word Tallahassee, but we want to move it to the margin, not off the object. The object that was being used is the arrow inside the guide sign program. Here, if we choose to use margin, you'll notice I can randomly move this all over the page. This is a tip that I would recommend. When you have trouble centering or moving legends, words, or symbols, click on the manual spacing button. What this will allow you to do is if we have 7.5 here and we want to match the 7.5 over here, we can go and zero out the left, zero out the right, zero out from the bottom, and our top, we can add in the distance down. The important note here is, if I type in 7.5 as shown, and I come in to click, you'll notice that it moves it down, but my left and right is moving. To stop that, we'll go back to the move command. We will click on manual spacing again to our panel. But we have the options here of our left and right. Once again, we want to zero. And we can fix our X or we can fix our Y. Let's try this one more time. What was happening, this is another trick or tip. What was happening is I was clicking in the panel and not to the legend itself, and it was trying to move the whole guide sign itself. We choose our margin again, zero out, put in our 7.5, zero out, and again we can choose to fix our X to where we cannot move our legend to our X. Now, the way the dimensioning looks, we have 7.5 in here, and if I create this and I say move it to my 7.5, I click and I update the panel, you will see that it's not 7.5, it is 8.8. The reason for that is the guide sign program is measuring, as shown in the MUTCD, from the edge of the margin or from the panel. In this case, we chose to move from our margin, and our margin is set by default from our border thickness of 1.5. Here we would choose to move from the top. Instead of 7.5, we would deduct that from our margin thickness of 1.25 inches from 7.5 inches, and we would have 6.25. We once again want to lock our X so that our legend cannot move on our X-axis, and we simply update the word Tallahassee, and we can again to check or come back and add at this point or any time through the process the name, the quantity, the station, and different types of reflectivity as needed. We can say OK. Once we have this completed, this sign is complete. We have our legend top and bottom. We have our wording. We have our legend top and bottom here. The word Tallahassee, whether we center it to the top or the bottom or to our legend, is still wanting to say 8.5 or 7.5. This is where most users, if they try to do this, get frustrated. So here again, we want to look at this, and the reason I'm showing this over is this seems to be one of the biggest complaints or issues that we have when moving stuff to try to center it, is whether we center it from the object, the margin, or the panel. So once again, we will select this move command from our margin. Again, we have to reset our distances to 0, left, right, and top. At this point, we have a difference of an inch on our side from being centered. We just determined that 6.25 would move us down to a 7.5 inch border on the top. We need to split that difference again. So we're going to, once again, fix the X and move from the top 6.75 . Another tip with the guide sign program is when you key in any of the data fields, your cursor has to remain in that data field when you enter it to select that item. Now that we've moved that an additional ½ inch to center our inch difference, you will now see a perfect 8, 8, and 8, 7.5, 9, and 7.5. We can once again, if we need to, update this panel, tell it OK. At this point, our sign is complete. If everything is complete upon the sign, we now can determine which type of sheet border we would choose to use for this guide sign panel. We do that by coming down our bar menu and selecting Guide Sign Sheet and Reports. Once again, we click, we open up our guide sign. For the Florida Department of Transportation, we have 3 cells set up for the use of guide sign. We have a 1 sign cell, a 2, and a 4. You would choose the sheet based on your specific job. If this was the only sign panel we had in our project, we can simply choose pane 1, FDOT 1. We tell it OK. You will see that it automatically set the sheet and centered our guide sign inside of that sheet. The option here was a default. I'm going to delete this sheet and go back once again through the step. Now that we see that that sheet is small, we have the option of changing our guide sign scale on our cell. The guide sign program scale is unlike your normal working microstation scale of a general 50 scale or 40 scale or maybe even a 20 scale. When you see this 75, it's pretty much a default. If we want to go larger, we could choose 60, say OK, and you'll see that our sign becomes slightly larger. If we still choose something different, we can once again place the sheet. We can tell it a 50 scale. As we go to the 50 scale, everything looks pretty good. We've got our sign panel information. We have our distances and our dimensions inside of our box. At this point, if If everything looks good, we once again go back to the guide sign bar menu. We will choose Place Report. Again, we need to click inside the panel. Here, it recognized our plot scale that's preset. Here, we need to choose the type sheet that we use for our report, which we chose FDOT 1 pane. We will click that, and we will simply say OK. At this point, we can zoom in, and we can see our sign name, our quantity, our station. We have our height and width and our arrow symbols. We have our legends and the spacing from our sign to each letter thickness to our total of our sign. At this point, this sign and sheet cell is complete. You would simply fill in your project information at the bottom, and this sheet is complete. Now that we have this, we could have the instance where we have another sign that needs to be added to our project. We can say that at the original point that the sign was created, the information was not in here. We can at this time choose our panel again, come in here and either add. We could change the name of this sign to 101. We could change our stationing if needed to be, our mounting height, our quantity, and even our size if needed. We can update our panel inside of the sheet. We can once again choose our reports, our FDOT 1 pane, and tell it OK. As you see, our sign name changed, our quantity changed, and our stationing changed. This can be done at any point throughout the project by simply updating the panel and replacing your legend information. Once you've completed the project for the sign, as I said, we may determine we need additional signage. We can delete this report. We can delete this sheet. The guide sign cell still retains the information it needs. If we determine that we need to add an additional sign to our project, we can simply come back to our sheet and choose the 2 pane to add a second sign. This is a very important tip. Once we determine that we have an additional sign to create, you first want to choose the sheet that fits your scenario of 2 or 4 signs and place the sign sheet border so that it centers your sign, and your next guide sign cell will be placed in the vacant slot on top of the cell. This will create and place your origin. If we place another guide sign border somewhere over, we would then have to try to manually move and have some issues. So you want to place a sheet once your first sign is created so that each additional sign has this identification point. Now that we determine we want to create an additional sign, we come back and go through the same steps. What type of sign do we want to use? We have our panel style set up. For our next sign, we will choose a distance panel. We will tell it OK. Once we tell it OK, we can then determine to use one of the guide sign template signs, For destination, again, this is the user's choice of using a preset sign by changing the different options. You could take away names by simply toggling on these switches, and then you would enter your information in here. For this example, I'm going to use a preset example. Say OK. And I'm going to type in inside of my name Orlando. And we will say it's a distance of 25 miles. With no arrows. And we can say Tampa, 75 miles. And toggle off arrows. And you will see we have a complete sign. We can tell it OK. And snap it to our location point inside our sheet. This is where I stress, once your first sign is created, place your sheet, appropriate sheet cell, before creating your next panel. Once you've done this, your scale is already set. Everything is complete. You will notice by using the preset distance, we have our 6-inch lettering. We have a 4.7 offset. Our scale is a little bit overlapping here. We have two options. We can choose and update our panel. We can change our name at this point to sign 102. Quantity if known. Stationing if known. Change our mounting height to ground. And we can change the size of our sign to a 60-inch sign by a 36-inch sign, putting them in increments of 6 inches, and say OK. At this point, we have a 7 top, 7 bottom, and an 8.5, 8.5 on our side. We have our separation line in between by our example, but we still have a slightly overlap in our dimensioning. We can change our dimensioning by clicking on the guide sign, place dimension, clicking our sign, and we still have our overlap. To change our dimensioning, we would have to change our scale value. We can place our report. Once again, make sure you choose the 2 pane, and you will see our information. Again, we can change or update this information as needed by clicking on the Update panel, changing the information, simply saying OK. Now that we have our two signs created, and we check our information out, everything lines up, our information's there. Again, we would simply fill out our project information. One tip I would like to give here, for those that have the FDOT system, you will notice that our plot scale is at 3.0. Again, GuideSign uses a different seed setup than what you are conventionally used to. Under our Label Sheet Navigator tool, if we place our standard digital note and save it to our sheet, you will notice another tip that I accidentally had. I had multiple sheets in this file, and it picked up a second sheet. If you have multiple sheets in a file, you want to make sure that they are placed in the same area. Or you will have, in your GuideSign program, you will have them offset if you have multiple sheets. But as I was saying, if we choose to place the standard note and save this sheet, you will notice that there's a slight difference in our height based on our plot scale. Our plot scale is set to 3 automatically in this particular file. That plot scale could be set slightly different. The plot scale, there is a fix for the plot scale, a conversion ratio for each type of sheet scale that we use. For the 50 scale, we want to choose a plot scale of 4.25, I believe. We can update our standard. And you will notice that it put it in there to our scale. Without this, you will have the same issue placing an engineer record cell as well. You cannot create a GuideSign sheet using a plot scale of 40 or 50 with the Sheet Navigator reading it. And that is because of the GuideSign seed and scale setup. Again, that is important that you recognize your plot scale and your scale of your text and legending in there, not setting it as 50 or 40 or something that you are normally accustomed to, or you will have problems placing your sheet information using the Sheet Navigator program. Now that we've had this, these are two simple everyday signs that you would have inside and create using the GuideSign program. Doesn't matter if you are using warning signs, building special regulatory signs, you would simply come in here, choose your options, choose the type sign panel that you would be using, and go from there. The next step that I would like to show is you will notice we have street name signs. If we're doing a set of signalization plans, we may have to choose to build a street name sign. So we have the option preset for different types of borders. For some districts and in some areas throughout the state, we use for our overhead signs, we use custom-made, internally illuminated signs. You will notice there's no options in here for those type of signs. The Guide Sign program allows us, under these panel styles, to create a custom-made new panel. You simply hit underneath your current panel, select New. It offers you a panel style. Here we can simply call it Internally Illuminated. We choose our type, the MUTCD version, and we say OK. You see it created our panel style in numerical order, or inside the panel in our alphabetical system. Now we have the choice of creating what type signs we have. Here it's a street name. We can determine our shape, our colors, what do we want to put on the sides of it, our radiuses. We have our border width. We can calculate it based on the MUTCD recommendations, our margins and spacing. Because we're using a custom sign that is made, here our border radiuses are going to be fixed. And our radius is going to be fixed pretty much to a 0 because we have a box. Our border thickness is going to be fixed as well. It's a special sign. The border thickness on your street name sign could vary based on the district or the preference of the local maintaining agency. This could be a foot, that's possibly 1.5 feet. Our inset is fixed at 0, no dividers, and our corner radiuses is going to be fixed at a 0. Our margins are set to calculate at a minimum of 3/4 inch. Top is a minimum of a half. The bottom is a minimum of a 1/2 inch. This is also can be determined or fixed. Here I will choose to let the program calculate it for me, and at a later point I can choose to move this margin left or right, top to bottom, using the move command. Our spacing will allow it to calculate. It's going to calculate it 1 times the height of the line, the distance between words and between letters. This is all preset. If you have a specialty font or a need, you can also fix these at this point. Our text can be changed. If we want to start off with 12, we can choose our ending, our street type, sections. Different types of these can be set, or we can simply say 0 if we don't have any of these types. We can choose uppercase, mixed case, our font, our block numbers for street names, the font, and a message, if we have one, can be set. We can then go to our symbols. Here, I would recommend allowing it to calculate based on the defaults. Once everything is set, we can say OK. At any point that we choose, we can come back to our sign that we've created and edit, rename it, or delete it if we choose to. Once we've determined and created our new panel, we'll go through the same process once again of placing that panel. Here, we could call it a name, number, we can put in a quantity, station if we have one, and because it's a street name, we'll use the default of overhead, and we will place our sign. Once again, you'll see it's large. As a default, we have the choice of coming in and placing our text. Here, we preset a height of 12 and our font. We could simply type the name of our street, place it, and you see that Guideline created automatically. We want to update our panel to center everything nice, and you will see that we have a street name that is a 2.5 feet tall, 10 foot in length, 9-inch margins. At this point, with an eternally illuminated sign, we have preset distances of 5, 4, 5, 6, 8, and sometimes 10. Let's say, for example, from a structural standpoint, this sign needs to be 8 feet. We can then again update our panel. We can lock our width now, and we could change this to 96, 90, different distances based on whatever our increments are. You will see we have our 8-foot sign, but our legend will no longer fit inside of that sign. At this point, if we determine that 8 feet is our maximum width, we can go and edit our text by going through the edit text in our advanced features and simply changing the size to a 10-inch lettering, update the panel using the update panel command. And you will notice we updated the panel, but the legend Walker Street did not move. We can simply move that by clicking on the Move command. Here, we can simply choose Off. We could manually move it, but then we would be guessing. We have no objects to move it to, so we can choose to move to the panel, but because our legend is outside of the panel, it will choose not to move. So again, the option that is best to choose is to use the margin. At this point, with nothing set, we click and place it in our margin. We update our view, and our sign is centered. We have the word Legend Walker Street. We have our 8-foot distance, our 2-foot height to create our sign. At any point, we can come back, again, update the quantities, the names, the station, our mounting height if needed, and even the size. Again, we would choose to place our drawing sheet, choosing 1 pane, 2 pane, or 4 pane. If for some reason you wanted to place this not as a sheet but as a cell, we can also choose some of these preset cells that will allow us to place this sign, place our information, once again, you have to choose the right text. Setup. And it will place your information inside the sheet. This particular cell and information can be placed inside a conventional plan sheet, on a special detail sheet, and not used as a standalone guide sign detail sheet, if you choose. Jimmy, at this point, do we have any questions that have come in?
Yeah, we've got 1 or 2 that come in, Michael, like a whole page full of them.
Okay.
We've only got time to answer a few of them right now, but we'll be able to, I'll give you a few, and then we'll reply to the others by, updating a Q&A document and posting it with a video.
Sure.
So I'll just try to pick out a couple here that were asked several times. There was several questions about how do you do the conversion factors with the scale when he was talking about like the 4.25 and so forth.
And I believe it's still there, Jimmy. The scale factor change, there is a, not sure the right terminology, Brad posted up a, to the Bentley site.
Okay.
And underneath that Bentley site, and I'm not on my machine, so I don't have the link to it. There's a conversion tool. There's also the fix for the sheets. I forgot to mention that. I'm glad that come up. You may, as a user, when you place the sheet, there was a sheet cell library where the annotate scale for the text number of posts comes in very large across your sheet. There is a replacement cell library for that. There is a cell conversion table as well underneath that Bentley forum site that I believe they can get to through the ECO website as well.
Yes, and I just posted a link in the GoToMeeting chat window.
Okay.
And that is a link to the auto turn and guide sign forum.
Yes, they are both. Those updates are still there and they still work.
Okay. There was a couple questions, I believe, about how do you handle the overlapping dimensions? What's the best way to handle that?
Oh, I thought, okay, I understand. The with the overlapping dimensions, you can actually come in and underneath your dimension scale, you may need to change or lower the scale, because it will automatically set to what we had set the plot scales to. And again, the scale factor, it's kind of hard to say, but you kind of have to, in guide sign, not always think 40, 50, 60s, and so on. Here, we want to choose to lower the scale so that our dimensions do not overlap. We can simply try, by trial and error more than anything, a 60. And then when we come back in and auto-update our panel, you'll see it changed, but it didn't go in the right direction. This is just simply, through your dimensions, you may have to increase or decrease that dimension height to get it to stop overlapping. See, we dropped down to a 30 and it helped, but we still have an issue with this. Some of this is because we have the separation in here, but again, we can come back into our locks under our dimensions, lower it down to 20, update our panel again, and we have it. The only problem with this is we can get to the point to where we also make this, the legibility of this difficult. Another tip or trick that I use too, when you have multiple signs such as this, you usually want to try to build your largest sign first and set the scale of your sheet by that. You don't always have that option because, again, as I used in this example, you may have a sign added later in the job or at some point, so the scale may drop down slightly. The other option here is you could go back and edit this sign and bring the scale up much larger of the sign, and then try to go back in and do your setup for your dimensioning as well. You could also add this sign as a secondary sheet. If you determine that you have a larger sign, you could simply move this sign by simply adding it to a secondary sheet by getting rid of this information. And don't be don't be alarmed or afraid to delete text or even dimensions around your sign, because your intelligence is inside that panel. I could simply come in and delete this sheet, delete that small sheet cell in the bottom. I could come in and place a drawing sheet here for a ones panel, update my information in here. Now you'll see, because I changed that scale, it changed it for every sign from that point on. We could simply go back in here again and update each sheet by going back to our dimensions of 50. Updating this panel. We can delete the sheet once again. Here, when we choose our sheet, we can set our scale. And it will update this sheet. We can now take, and for the example, I'll move this out of our way. And as long as we select the whole entire panel, we can move and manipulate some with MicroStation. I wouldn't recommend a whole lot, but we can move this over. You have to bear with me for a minute. I'm on a different PC. Unselect. For some reason, on this machine, there we go. Having some technical difficulties. Once we move and sort this sheet, if we decide that we cannot fit two sign panels in the same sheet and have our cells, our text comparable, which is a very common, we can place it in a second sheet. Again, you see that the difference that guide sign created in these two panels shows up again. Sometimes, again, this is a trial and error thing, so don't feel like it only happens to your machine or to you when you're using it. Once again, we want to drop this scale down. We can go, say, try 30. Still stand to go a little smaller. We can create it to a 20. Change our report. Make sure it's on 20. And we can place it in here. We can now update our panel and place our dimensions in here with better legibility. So you have the option. You will notice the change in the sheet cells once again. This goes back. I cannot be adamant enough about the scales. I'm glad this came up, Jimmy, because the issue you have here, and again, this is something that you'll deal with multiple signs when you have multiple sheets. I would recommend a guide sign design file per sheet cell that you have. The reason for that is just as you see, the scale factors are different. Once you determine these scale factors, that dictates your digital signature note and your engineer records in these cells. So once again, if you have multiple sheets for guide sign, whether they're the 1 pane, the 2 pane, or the 4 pane, I would recommend only one guide sign sheet per file.
Well, thank you, Michael, for doing this for us, and we'll get the questions and the answers to you to help us answer those and get them posted along with the video.
Sure, no problem at all.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank everybody for attending and posting all the questions. We'll try to get those answered and posted as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.